You settle into your pillow tonight, ready to drift away from the glowing screens and endless notifications of modern life. The room grows quiet around you, and somewhere in that peaceful darkness, you're about to step into a world where love letters were carved in stone and divorce papers were written on papyrus. Welcome to ancient Egypt, where romance bloomed along the Nile and marriage contracts were more detailed than your current streaming service agreement. Tonight, we're wandering through the intimate moments of people who lived 4,000 years ago. Their first kisses under desert stars, their wedding preparations, their quiet domestic arguments about whose turn it was to feed the cat. And yes, they really did worship cats, so that argument probably happened more than once. You probably won't make it through this entire ancient Egyptian love story without drifting off, and honestly, that's exactly what we're hoping for. She's sitting by her window, carefully applying kohl around her eyes with a thin bronze applicator. Her father, a scribe in the local temple, has arranged for her to meet a young man named Wasit, who works as a foreman overseeing the construction of a minor nobleman's tomb. But it lived alongside arranged marriages in a way that might seem foreign to us. Historians still debate whether love marriages or arranged marriages were more common among ordinary Egyptians. She's nervous, you can see it in the way she adjusts her jewelry, a collection of gold and carnelian beads that catch the last rays of sunlight. Her hands are decorated with henna in intricate patterns, a practice that served both decorative and practical purposes. The henna helped protect her skin from the sun while making her hands look like living works of art, and protective, while probably being more interested in the plate of honey cakes that someone has thoughtfully provided. Ancient Egyptian teenagers were apparently just as easily distracted by snacks as modern ones. There's no pretense here, no carefully curated social media personas to maintain. It's not expensive, but it's personal, something he clearly made himself during his evening hours. Unlike many ancient cultures that treated love as either a divine affliction or a dangerous distraction, Egyptians celebrated it as one of life's great pleasures. They described symptoms that we'd recognize today: inability to concentrate, loss of appetite, restless nights, and the peculiar way that everything reminds you of the person you're missing. There's no immediate proposal. That would come later, after more meetings and careful consideration of practical matters like property arrangements and family compatibility. But there's clearly mutual interest, and you can already imagine the wedding preparations that might follow if things continue to go well. The cure, according to these ancient poets, was simple: the sight of the beloved's face. The sound of the Nile lapping gently against its banks mingles with the distant call of night birds, creating a peaceful symphony that has remained unchanged for millennia. Tomorrow will bring new developments in this ancient love story, but for now the garden holds only possibility and the quiet contentment of two people who have found each other worthy of a second meeting. Their love poems, written on papyrus and ostraka, are surprisingly sensual and emotionally sophisticated. They wrote about longing, desire, the agony of separation, and the joy of reunion with a directness that would make a modern romance novelist blush. Nefertiti accepts it with a smile that transforms her face, and you realize that 4,000 years ago or today, the gesture of thoughtful gift-giving hits exactly the same emotional notes. They're both essentially conducting a job interview for the position of life partner, but with the understanding that mutual respect and compatibility matter more than overwhelming passion. though from the way they're looking at each other, a little passion wouldn't go amiss either. But the evidence suggests that both existed, sometimes even overlapping, in ways that would make a modern relationship counselor's head spin. There's something in the way they lean slightly toward each other when they speak, in the careful attention they pay to each other's words, that suggests the ancient Egyptians understood the butterflies and stomach phenomenon as well as anyone. Date palms provide shade, and lotus flowers float in a rectangular pool that reflects the deepening sky. He's tall and lean from years of physical labor, his skin bronzed by the sun, and his hands calloused but clean. He's made an effort tonight. His linen kilt is freshly laundered and pleated, and he's wearing a simple gold amulet around his neck in the shape of an ankh. Yes, their families arranged this meeting, but there's genuine curiosity in both their faces as they size each other up. Kamwasit asks about her weaving, a skill that all Egyptian women were expected to master, and one that could indicate both creativity and practicality. Nefertiti asks about his work, and you can see her genuinely listening as he describes the challenges of organizing teams of workers and ensuring that the tomb paintings meet the standards of their perfectionist nobleman employer. His hair is cut in the fashionable style of the time, short and neat, and he has clearly applied some kind of scented oil because you catch a whiff of cedar and cinnamon as he passes. You settle onto a stone bench nearby, becoming an invisible observer of this ancient courtship ritual that's about to unfold. In our modern world, we might call this a blind date, except it's been orchestrated by families and has the potential to become a lifelong legal partnership. A wife could own property, initiate divorce, and even keep her own name after marriage. Try explaining that to a time traveler from medieval Europe, and they'd probably think you were describing a fantasy realm. Egyptian women had rights that wouldn't appear in many other cultures for thousands of years. This isn't vanity. It's practicality mixed with beauty. The kohl protects her eyes from the harsh desert sun and also happens to make them look absolutely stunning. Ancient Egyptians had essentially invented sunglasses, just in a much more attractive form. Before we begin our journey down the Nile of romance, take a moment to like this video if you're enjoying the peaceful pace, and subscribe if you'd like more history to help you sleep. Leave a comment letting us know where you're re-listening from and what time it is in your corner of the world. There is something wonderfully connecting about knowing we all settling into rest together, separated by centuries from our ancient Egyptian friends, but united in our very human need for love and sleep. Now let's ease into tonight's journey, back to a time when the pyramids were already ancient monuments and love was just as complicated as it is today. You find yourself walking along the banks of the Nile just as the sun begins its descent toward the western desert. The year is somewhere around 1400 BCE, during the height of Egypt's new kingdom, and you're in the bustling city of Thebes. The air carries the scent of lotus blossoms and the distant sound of workers singing as they load barges with grain. You're dressed in the finest linen, lightweight and breathable, because ancient Egyptians understood long before modern fashion that comfort should never be sacrificed for appearance. As you stroll past the whitewashed houses with their flat rooftops, you notice a young woman named Nefertiti. No, not that Nefertiti, just one of the hundreds of women who shared the name meaning the beautiful one has come. Nefertiti is preparing for something important. You can tell by the way she is taking extra care with her appearance, smoothing precious oils into her skin that smell of myrrh and frankincense. The concept of romantic love as we know it today, that overwhelming, choose-your-own-partner, against all odds feeling, did exist in ancient Egypt. What's fascinating is that ancient Egyptian marriage contracts were remarkably fair to women by historical standards. As evening approaches, you follow Nefertiti as she makes her way to the garden where she'll meet Kamwaset. The garden where Nefertiti waits is a small oasis of green in the golden landscape, carefully tended and irrigated with water from the Nile. Kamwaset arrives precisely as the call to evening prayers echoes from the nearby temple. The meeting is chaperoned, of course, by Nefertiti's younger brother, who does his best to look stern. What strikes you about this first encounter is how surprisingly natural it feels. The conversation flows more easily than many modern first dates you've witnessed. As the stars begin to appear in the darkening sky, Kamwaset produces a small gift, a carved wooden comb decorated with tiny lotus flowers. The ancient Egyptians had a fascinating approach to love poetry that reveals a lot about their attitudes toward romance. One particularly popular theme in Egyptian love poetry was the lover's illness, not a real sickness, but the metaphorical disease of being separated from one's beloved. Historians still debate whether these poems reflected real emotional experiences or were just literary conventions, but watching Nefertiti and Kamwaset tonight, you suspect the emotions were entirely genuine. As their chaperoned meeting comes to an end, both families seem pleased with how things have gone. The moon is rising now, casting silver light across the garden pool, and you feel yourself growing drowsy as the ancient Egyptian night settles around you. 3 weeks have passed since that first meeting in the garden, and you find yourself following Nefertiti through the narrow streets of Thebes as she makes her way to the marketplace. The morning sun filters through the linen awnings that stretch between buildings, creating a patchwork of light and shadow that dances across the packed earth beneath your feet. Last week it was a small vial of perfumed oil that he decommissioned from a master perfumer in the temple quarter. The week before, a set of ivory hairpins carved with tiny birds in flight. Today, if all goes according to plan, he's going to make a much more significant gesture. But this isn't just any ring. It's what we might call an engagement ring, though the ancient Egyptians had their own terminology for it. You can practically see his heart hammering beneath his linen tunic as he clears his throat and asks if he might speak with her privately, well as privately, as one can speak in a crowded marketplace with a chaperone hovering nearby like an ancient Egyptian helicopter parent. They called it a ring of eternity, and it carried the same symbolic weight that our modern engagement rings do, representing an unbroken circle of commitment and devotion. Just 2 people standing in the shade of a date palm while Kamwaset explains that he has spoken with both sets of parents and received their blessing to ask for her hand in marriage. This isn't just about the ring or the family arrangements. She's making her own choice here, and you can see the moment when she decides that yes. There's none of the competitive edge that sometimes accompanies modern engagement announcements. No subtle comments about finally or it's about time. Instead, there are warm congratulations, offers to help with wedding preparations, and the kind of community support that suggests marriage was viewed as a celebration for everyone, not just the couple involved. This is the man she wants to wake up next to for the rest of her life. Historians still debate whether ancient Egyptian women had complete freedom in choosing their husbands, but watching this scene unfold, it's clear that Nefertiti's opinion matters enormously in this decision. The walls are thick to keep out the heat. The windows are small and positioned to catch the prevailing breeze, and there's a flat roof that can serve as additional living space during the cooler evening hours. They're discussing the wedding ceremony, which will take place in about 2 months when the Nile flood season ends and travel becomes easier for relatives coming from other cities. The timing isn't coincidental. Ancient Egyptians preferred to hold weddings during the season of emergence, when the floodwaters receded and new life appeared on the fertile mud. It was considered auspicious to begin a marriage when the land itself was being reborn. The couple would share a meal together, exchange gifts, and formally sign the marriage contract in front of witnesses. They're looking out over the city, pointing to various landmarks and discussing their future plans with the easy intimacy of people who have moved beyond formal courtship into genuine partnership. They're not dreaming of grand adventures or dramatic romances. They're rediscussing practical things like where to buy the best bread and how many children they hope to have. It's the kind of conversation that happens in bedrooms and kitchens across all cultures and centuries. The quiet negotiation of shared dreams that forms the foundation of lasting partnerships. She mentions wanting to plant a garden in the small courtyard. He talks about his hopes for promotion to master builder within the next few years. Tomorrow will bring more wedding planning, more construction work, more of the countless small decisions that transform 2 separate lives into one shared journey. But for now, there's just the satisfaction of watching a home take shape and a future unfold, one conversation and one carefully placed brick at a time. The feast that followed could last for days, depending on the family's resources and social standing. It's not luxurious, but it's theirs, and that matters more than square footage when you're starting a life together. It's a modest 2-room dwelling in a respectable neighborhood, close enough to the temple complex where Kamwasit works, but far enough from the main thoroughfares to offer some peace and quiet. It wasn't about domestic subservience. It was about claiming ownership and establishing herself as the mistress of her own domain. Ancient Egyptian women took property rights seriously, and this ritual was their way of publicly declaring that they were now the co-owner of everything within these walls. He's clearly in his element here, comfortable with the physical demands of construction and the logistical challenges of coordinating different craftsmen. Unlike many ancient cultures where weddings were primarily religious ceremonies overseen by priests, Egyptian weddings were essentially civil contracts celebrated with family and community. The religious aspect came from the belief that marriage was blessed by the gods, particularly Hathor, the goddess of love and joy, but the actual ceremony focused on the practical and legal aspects of joining 2 lives together. There's something deeply satisfying about watching someone prepare a nest for their future family, and you can see the pride in his face as each improvement takes shape. The previous occupants, an elderly scribe and his wife, have moved in with their son's family, and the house needs some work before it's ready for newlyweds. She's accompanied by her mother and sister, who immediately begin discussing the domestic arrangements with the intense focus of women who understand that the devil is always in the details. Where will the grain storage go? How will the cooking area be arranged? Is there enough space for a loom because every proper Egyptian household needed someone who could weave linen? He presents the ring with hands that are definitely trembling, and you realize that some things about human nature haven't changed at all in 4,000 years. Unlike modern engagements, which often focus on planning a single day of celebration, Egyptian engagement periods were about creating the legal and financial framework that would support the marriage for decades to come. She's carrying a small basket woven from palm fronds, and there's a particular spring in her step that suggests this isn't just an ordinary shopping expedition. Kame Wasset has been visiting regularly, always properly chaperoned, always bringing small gifts that show he's been paying attention to their conversations. The marketplace is alive with the sounds and smells that have defined urban commerce for millennia. Vendors calling out their wares, the bleating of goats, the rich aroma of fresh bread mixing with incense and dried fish. Ancient Egyptian marriage contracts were essentially prenuptial agreements, but with a twist. They were generally more favorable to women than similar documents in most other ancient cultures. A wife could own property independently, engage in business, and even leave her husband if he failed to provide for her or treated her poorly. It was like having a marriage lawyer built into the cultural expectations, which honestly seems like a pretty good system. You watch Nefertiti pause at a stall selling jewelry, her fingers trailing over necklaces of gold and semi-precious stones. He's consulting with the same jewelry merchant, trying to select something that will convey his serious intentions without bankrupting himself. The economics of ancient Egyptian courtship were surprisingly similar to modern dating, expensive enough to show you care, affordable enough that you can still eat afterward. The merchant, a weathered woman with keen eyes and the negotiating skills of a modern-day car salesman, immediately recognizes a young woman in love and adjusts her prices accordingly. What Nefertiti doesn't know is that Kame Wasset is already here, lurking behind a stack of grain sacks like some ancient Egyptian version of a romantic comedy protagonist. The piece he finally selects is a gold ring set with a piece of lapis lazuli, the deep blue stone that Egyptians associated with the heavens and divine favor. As Nefertiti examines a collection of silver bracelets, Kame Wasset approaches with the casual nonchalance of someone trying very hard to look casual and nonchalant. The proposal itself is refreshingly straightforward by ancient standards. There are no grand gestures, no public declarations. Nefertiti's acceptance is equally direct, though you notice she takes a moment to really look at him before she nods. The engagement period in ancient Egypt typically lasted several months, giving both families time to negotiate the marriage contract and arrange the wedding festivities. The marriage contract they'll eventually sign will be surprisingly detailed, covering everything from property rights to what happens if the marriage ends in divorce. As word of the engagement spreads through the marketplace and news travels fast in a community where everyone knows everyone else. As business, you re-struck by how genuinely happy people seem for the couple. The sound of hammering echoes through the morning air as you make your way to the house that will soon become Nefertiti and Kame Wasset as first home together. You watch as Kame Wasset directs a small team of workers in repairing the roof and replastering the walls. Nefertiti arrives carrying a large pottery jar of beer, the universal ancient Egyptian refreshment that was safer to drink than water and provided essential calories for working men. The house itself is typical of middle-class Egyptian homes, functional, comfortable, and designed for the climate. As the workers take their beer break, you listen to the conversation flowing between the two families. The wedding preparations reveal fascinating details about ancient Egyptian values and priorities. One of the most charming traditions was the housewarming ritual, where the bride would symbolically take possession of her new home by lighting the first fire in the hearth and preparing the first meal. Historians still debate whether ancient Egyptian marriages included formal vows like modern ceremonies, but the evidence suggests that the commitment was expressed through actions rather than words. As afternoon settles over the construction site, you notice Nefertiti and Khaimwaset stealing a quiet moment together on the partially completed roof. There's something deeply touching about watching two people plan their ordinary, extraordinary life together. The late afternoon light catches the dust motes dancing in the air around them, and you feel yourself relaxing into the peaceful rhythm of domestic preparation. Section 5. The morning of the wedding dawns clear and bright with the kind of perfect weather that makes you suspect the gods really do smile on true love, or at least on couples sensible enough to plan their ceremonies during the most pleasant season of the Egyptian year. Her mother applies kohl to her eyes with the steady hand of someone who has done this countless times before, while her sister weaves jasmine flowers into her hair. The bride herself seems remarkably calm for someone about to make one of life's biggest decisions, though you notice her hands trembling slightly as her cousin fastens a magnificent collar necklace of gold and turquoise around her throat. The lyrics speak of fertility, happiness, and the hope that the new wife will bring honor to both her birth family and her husband's household. You slip away from the bridal preparations to find him in his family's courtyard, where his father and brothers are offering the kind of pre-wedding advice that hasn't changed much in 4,000 years. Be patient. Listen more than you talk, and remember that marriage is a partnership, not a conquest. The space has been transformed with garlands of lotus flowers, burning incense, and enough oil lamps to turn the evening into something magical. There were no priests officiating, no religious vows, no complex liturgies, just two people making a public commitment to each other in front of their community. The legal aspect was handled by the signing of the marriage contract, which had been finalized days earlier after intensive negotiations between the families that probably rivaled modern corporate mergers in their complexity. But watching Nefertiti and Khaimwaset tonight, you notice that both are wearing matching gold bands inscribed with hieroglyphs spelling out each other's names. The circular symbolism was as powerful to them as it is to us an unbroken bond with no beginning and no end. The guest list includes both families, their closest friends, and various neighbors who have watched this courtship unfold with the invested interest of people who live in a community where everyone's business is everyone's business. Ancient Egyptians clearly knew how to throw a party, and this one shows every sign of continuing well into the night. Musicians play harps and flutes while dancers perform traditional celebration dances that tell stories of fertility and abundance. The food includes all the classics of Egyptian cuisine: roasted duck, fresh fish from the Nile, honey cakes. Someone starts telling stories about famous lovers from Egyptian history and mythology, including the tale of Isis and Osiris, whose love was so strong it literally conquered death. Apart and in mixed groups, without the rigid gender segregation that characterized many ancient cultures. The entire party forms a torch-lit parade through the streets, singing and calling out blessings as they accompany the couple to the house you watch them prepare weeks earlier. It's like an ancient Egyptian version of a newlywed send-off, except instead of throwing rice or birdseed, people toss flower petals and dates for sweetness and fertility. There's something refreshingly modern about watching people simply enjoy music and movement together, regardless of social conventions, and hear the quiet murmur of conversation as the couple settles into their new reality. An artistic representation suggests that many couples developed genuine affection and partnership over time, even when their marriages began as practical arrangements. The emphasis on compatibility, shared responsibilities, and mutual respect seems to have created a foundation for relationships that could evolve into deep emotional bonds. Tomorrow will bring the beginning of Nefertiti and Kamwaset's married life, with all its ordinary challenges and extraordinary moments. But tonight belongs to celebration, to the ancient human ritual of witnessing love and promising to support it through whatever the future may bring. They're probably discussing the day's events, sharing their observations about various relatives' behavior, and beginning the lifelong process of creating their own family traditions and inside jokes. The stories get progressively more amusing as the beer takes effect, and you hear several versions of married life that would probably make a modern relationship counselor either laugh or cry. There are practical items: cooking pots, grinding stones, baskets for storage, and bolts of linen for clothing. Strip away the specific cultural details, the linen clothing, the hieroglyphic decorations, the particular foods and music, and you re-left with something utterly universal. Two people making a commitment to build a life together, surrounded by their community's love and support. They've scattered rose petals on the bed, arranged oil lamps to create soft lighting, and left small gifts of perfumed oils and honey cakes for the couple to share in private. The attention to creating a romantic atmosphere suggests that ancient Egyptians understood the importance of setting the right mood for intimate moments. But there are also more personal touches. A wooden headrest carved with protective symbols for peaceful sleep, a set of cosmetic containers made from painted pottery, and a small wooden chest for storing jewelry and precious items, and enough beer to ensure that everyone will remember this as a very good time indeed. Some of the verses are surprisingly frank about the physical aspects of marriage, delivered with the matter-of-fact attitude of women who understood that a successful marriage required compatibility in all areas of life. But as a symbol of his commitment to support and protect her in their new life together, the guests cheer and offer final blessings before gradually dispersing into the night, leaving the newlyweds alone in their first home as husband and wife. His chest is bare, except for a broad collar necklace that matches Nefertiti's, a visual symbol of their new unity. The newlyweds sit together on a raised platform decorated with lotus flowers, accepting congratulations and gifts from a steady stream of well-wishers who seem determined to ensure their future prosperity through sheer volume of good intentions. She presents Nefertiti with a small clay figurine of a woman holding a baby, a fertility charm that combines religious belief with practical hope. Ancient Egyptians were remarkably open about their desire for children, viewing large families as both an economic necessity and a divine blessing. The elderly woman whispers something in Nefertiti's ear that makes the young bride blush and laugh, and you suspect the advice has something to do with encouraging those future babies to make their appearance. His hair has been freshly cut and oiled, and someone has clearly insisted that he scrub his work-calloused hands until they as clean as they going to get. You find yourself in Nefertiti's family home, where the air is thick with the scent of jasmine. They fed each other small pieces of honey cake, while their guests called out blessings and good wishes. It was intimate, personal, and remarkably modern in its focus on the couple's actual relationship, rather than abstract religious or social concepts. And the excited chatter of women who had been preparing for this day since before dawn. Nefertiti sits in the center of the main room, while her female relatives and friends work around her like a team of ancient beauticians. The wedding dress is a marvel of ancient Egyptian fashion, a fitted sheath of the finest linen, so finely woven it's almost transparent, layered over a simpler undergarment for modesty. The fabric has been pleated in intricate patterns that catch the light and create subtle shadows as she moves. It's dyed a soft saffron yellow, a color associated with gold and divine favor, and embroidered around the neckline with tiny lotus flowers in silver thread. Modern brides spend fortunes trying to achieve the timeless elegance that ancient Egyptian weavers created as a matter of course. As the women work, they sing traditional songs that have been passed down through generations of mothers preparing daughters for marriage. Meanwhile, across the city, Wasset is undergoing his own preparation ritual, though the male version involves considerably less elaborate grooming and significantly more anxiety-induced pacing. His wedding outfit is simpler but no less elegant than his bride's, a kilt of pristine white linen, pleated and starched to perfection with a decorative belt of gold and carnelian. The ceremony itself takes place in the garden where they first met, a touch of romance that suggests someone in the family has a poet's soul. Ancient Egyptian wedding ceremonies were refreshingly straightforward compared to the elaborate rituals of many other cultures. The heart of the ceremony was the sharing of bread and beer, ancient symbols of sustenance and joy that represented the couple's commitment to provide for each other through all of life's circumstances. Historians still debate whether ancient Egyptian couples exchanged rings during the ceremony itself, or if the engagement ring was simply considered sufficient. As the formal ceremony concludes and the feast begins, you're struck by how joyful and relaxed everyone seems. The wedding feast stretches on through the evening hours, and you find yourself seated on a low stool near the musicians, watching the celebration unfold with the contentment of someone who has eaten well and witnessed something genuinely beautiful. The gifts themselves offer a fascinating glimpse into what ancient Egyptians considered essential for a successful marriage. One gift that particularly catches your attention comes from an elderly woman who introduces herself as the neighborhood's unofficial matchmaker. As the night progresses, the formal structure of the celebration gradually gives way to more spontaneous entertainment. The dancing becomes more elaborate as younger guests show off their skills, and you notice that Egyptian social dancing is remarkably egalitarian. Men and women dance together around midnight. The bride and groom participate in one of the most charming Egyptian wedding traditions, the ceremonial procession to their new home. The house itself has been transformed by the female relatives who arrived earlier in the day to perform the traditional preparation of the bridal chamber. As the procession reaches the house, there is a moment of ritual significance when Wasset literally carries Nefertiti across the threshold, not because she is incapable of walking from your position in the small courtyard. You can see the soft glow of oil lamps through the windows. Historians still debate whether ancient Egyptian marriages were typically happy by modern standards, but the evidence from letters poetry, as the celebration winds down and the last guests make their way home through the moonlit streets, you're struck by how timeless this entire experience is felt. The night air is cooling now, carrying the familiar scent of the Nile and the distant sound of temple bells marking the late hour. 6 months have passed since the wedding celebration, and you find yourself returning to the small house that has become a home in the truest sense of the word. The morning sun streams through the windows, illuminating walls that now bear the marks of daily life, cooking stains near the hearth where patterns on the floor where feet have traveled the same paths, hundreds of times, and small niches carved into the walls to hold the growing collection of household gods and personal treasures that accumulate when two lives merge into one. Nefertiti moves through her morning routine with the efficiency of someone who has learned to manage a household while maintaining her own work as a weaver. She's at her loom now, working on a complex pattern that will eventually become a ceremonial cloth for the local temple. Unlike many couples throughout history who might have let such disputes fester or involve extended family members, Nefertiti and Kamwasit worked it out themselves. Nefertiti had access to all household accounts, could make independent purchases, and maintained her own separate property that Kamwasit couldn't touch without her permission. Nefertiti has been feeling unwell for several weeks. Nothing serious, just persistent nausea and unusual fatigue. Yesterday evening her mother arrived for a visit, took one look at her daughter. She has already started making subtle changes to her daily routine, avoiding certain foods that now make her feel sick, taking more frequent rest breaks, and spending long conversations with the neighborhood women who have experience with pregnancy and childbirth, and announced with the confidence of someone who has seen this pattern before that there would be a new addition to the family sometime around the next flood season. Within hours of the official announcement, neighbors began arriving with advice, remedies for morning sickness, and offers of practical help. The Egyptians developed an elaborate system of protective amulets, prayers, and rituals designed to ensure safe delivery and healthy babies. Torrid explains which herbs help with nausea, ginger, and mint remedies that modern medicine has confirmed are actually effective, while also describing the proper way to arrange protective symbols around the sleeping area to ward off evil spirits that might harm the unborn child. They discuss converting the smaller room into a nursery, budgeting for additional expenses, and the logistics of managing a household with an infant. This isn't just about superstition. It is about creating a sense of control and security in a situation where so much was genuinely beyond their control. The amulets, prayers, and protective rituals served a psychological function that was probably as important as any medical benefit they might have provided. The gentle exercise is supposed to be good for pregnant women, according to ancient Egyptian medical wisdom. Ancient Egyptian naming practices were quite different from modern ones, often reflecting the parents' hopes for their child's future or their gratitude to particular gods. They're considering Amenhotep if it's a boy, meaning Amen is satisfied, and Hatshepsut if it's a girl, meaning foremost of noble women. And the peaceful setting provides an opportunity for them to talk through their hopes and concerns away from the well-meaning but overwhelming advice of their extended families. Shared these same hopes and fears and prepared to welcome new life into an uncertain but hopeful world. The details change, the clothes, the customs, the specific challenges, but the fundamental human experience of creating and nurturing life remains beautifully, remarkably constant. Pregnancy management from her mother-in-law, a formidable woman named Torit, who has successfully raised 7 children and considers herself something of an expert on the subject. These small gestures speak to the deepening intimacy that pregnancy can bring to a marriage, the way couples learn to anticipate each other's needs and provide support without being asked. She takes careful notes on a piece of papyrus, creating her own reference guide for the months ahead. But watching Nefertiti and Kemwaset tonight, you see clear evidence of genuine partnership and affection. They've moved beyond the polite consideration of their early marriage into something more complex and comfortable, the kind of relationship that can weather the storms of pregnancy hormones, financial stress, and sleep deprivation that come with new parenthood. Unlike many ancient cultures that showed strong preferences for male children, Egyptians valued daughters almost as highly as sons. Girls could inherit property, run businesses, and even rule as pharaohs in exceptional circumstances. The name Hatshepsut carries particular significance because it has the same name as one of Egypt's most successful female pharaohs, suggesting that Nefertiti and Kemwaset have high aspirations for their potential daughter. He's been consulting with other fathers in the neighborhood, learning about the additional responsibilities that come with parenthood. The conversations reveal another aspect of ancient Egyptian family life that might surprise modern parents: the expectation that fathers would be actively involved in child-rearing, not just distant providers. The relationship between the two women is clearly evolving from formal politeness to genuine partnership, united by their shared concern for the health and safety of the coming baby. A baby means additional expenses for food, clothing, and medical care, but it also represents a long-term investment in the family's future. Children in ancient Egypt were expected to care for their aging parents, making them a form of social security in a culture without formal retirement systems. The financial planning that Nefertiti and Kemwaset are doing now reflects this dual nature of children as both immediate expense and future security. The lesson takes place in the main room, with Nefertiti seated on a low stool, while Torit demonstrates the proper way to prepare various herbal remedies and protective amulets. It's the same conversation that expectant parents have had throughout history, mixing practical concerns with dreams and hopes for their child's future. Some of these practices seem purely superstitious to modern eyes, but others show remarkable practical wisdom about nutrition, rest, and prenatal care. Ancient Egyptian women approached pregnancy as a community responsibility, not just an individual experience, and you can see how this support system would have been crucial in a time when medical knowledge was limited and childbirth was genuinely dangerous. Their marriage contract, which you remember from the wedding preparations, specifically outlined these financial arrangements in detail that would make modern prenups look casual by comparison. They sat down that evening, reviewed their actual financial situation, and came up with a budget that allowed for both modest luxuries and responsible saving. It was remarkably mature for two people who had been married for less than 6 months. Kemwaset has been pacing the courtyard since dawn, alternating between grinning like someone who has just discovered treasure and looking terrified like someone who has just realized he is about to become responsible for keeping a tiny human alive. Ancient Egyptian men were expected to be involved fathers, But the reality of impending parenthood apparently induced the same mixture of joy and panic that it does today. Her fingers move with practiced skill, and you can see the satisfaction in her face as the design takes shape thread by thread. Ancient Egyptian women were expected to contribute economically to their households, and Nefertiti's weaving brings in enough income to make a real difference in their standard of living. The marriage has settled into the kind of comfortable rhythm that develops when two people figure out how to live together without driving each other completely insane. Kame Wasset leaves for work each morning with a small lunch of bread and dried fish that Nefertiti prepares, and returns each evening with news from the construction site and whatever gossip he has picked up from the other workers. You witnessed their first major argument 3 weeks ago, a spectacular dispute over money that started when Kame Wasset wanted to buy a more expensive grade of beer, and Nefertiti pointed out that they were still paying for wedding expenses. The argument escalated with the kind of creative insults that suggest both parties have been saving up their best material for just such an occasion. Ancient Egyptians, it turns out, were quite inventive when it came to marital bickering. They've developed their own version of the eternal marital dance: who does which chores, how to handle disagreements, and the art of sharing space without constantly getting in each other's way. Not that it's been entirely smooth sailing. What impressed you about the argument, though, was how they resolved it. The resolution involved a fascinating aspect of ancient Egyptian marriage that modern couples might find surprising. The complete financial transparency that was built into their legal system. This morning brings a new development that has both of them walking around with barely suppressed excitement. The news has transformed the house into a buzz of activity. Nefertiti seems more composed, though you notice her hands rest frequently on her still flat belly with the unconscious gesture of women who are beginning to understand that their bodies are no longer entirely their own. The community response to pregnancy news reveals another fascinating aspect of ancient Egyptian society: the extensive support network that surrounded expectant mothers. Historians still debate the exact infant mortality rates in ancient Egypt, but the evidence suggests they were high enough that pregnancy was always tinged with anxiety alongside the joy. As the morning progresses, you watch Nefertiti and Kame Wasset beginning to plan for their expanding family. The afternoon heat drives everyone indoors, and you find yourself in the cool interior of the house, watching Nefertiti receive her first formal lesson in ancient Egyptian. The knowledge being passed down is a fascinating mixture of practical wisdom and magical thinking that characterizes ancient Egyptian approaches to medicine and health. What strikes you about this scene is how seriously both women take the ritual aspects of pregnancy preparation. Nefertiti listens with the intense attention of someone who understands that this information might literally be a matter of life and death. Meanwhile, Kame Wasset has thrown himself into preparation mode with the intensity of someone who has found a way to channel his anxiety into productive action. The economic implications of the pregnancy are also becoming clear. As evening approaches, you join the couple for their daily walk along the Nile, a routine they've maintained throughout their marriage. Their conversation tonight touches on topics that would be familiar to any expectant couple: what kind of parents they want to be, how they'll manage the balance between work and family responsibilities, and the eternal question of names. The names they're considering reveal something important about ancient Egyptian attitudes toward children and gender. As they walk, you notice how naturally Wasset has adjusted his pace to accommodate Nefertiti's changing needs, and how she unconsciously leans into his support when they encounter uneven ground. Historians still debate whether ancient Egyptian marriages typically involved the kind of emotional intimacy that modern couples expect. As the sun sets over the Nile, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson that have remained unchanged for millennia, you feel a sense of continuity with all the expectant parents who have walked these same paths. The months have passed with the measured rhythm of the Nile's seasons, and you find yourself once again in the familiar house, though it has been transformed by the presence of a tiny person who has very strong opinions about when everyone should be awake. Motherhood has transformed her in ways both subtle and profound. She moves with a new efficiency, her ears perpetually tuned to the smallest sounds from the baby's corner, and there is a confidence in her bearing that speaks to the ancient truth that successfully keeping a tiny human alive does wonders for one's sense of capability. Baby Amenemheb. Amen is in festival babies, it turns out, have had the same needs and habits for thousands of years. They require frequent feeding, constant attention, and possess an uncanny ability to time their most urgent demands for the least convenient moments. Nefertiti has been nursing the baby while managing her weaving work, a balancing act that requires the kind of multitasking skills that would impress modern working mothers. A name chosen when he arrived 3 weeks early, with the kind of dramatic timing that suggested he would never be one, to quietly blend into the background, sleeps fitfully in a woven basket lined with the softest linen his parents could afford. Tauret, the formidable mother-in-law, has essentially moved in to help with household tasks and baby care, bringing with her a wealth of practical knowledge about infant care that makes the difference between surviving and thriving during those overwhelming first months. There's still the occasional moment of panic when the baby cries and nothing seems to comfort him, or when they realize they have no idea whether his behavior is normal or cause for concern. Infant care requires time and attention that reduces Nefertiti's weaving productivity, while the additional expenses of baby care strain the household budget. But there's also the long-term view that children represent investment in the family's future, additional workers for the household economy, and the social security that comes from raising children who will care for their aging parents. Ancient Egyptian parents faced the same challenges as modern ones when it came to creating an environment where curious toddlers could explore safely while fragile or dangerous items remained intact. But there's also a growing confidence in their ability to figure things out, to provide what their child needs, and one on her son, who has developed an impressive ability to find trouble in the most innocuous situations. Ancient Egyptian children were valued and indulged to a degree that would surprise anyone familiar with the harsh child-rearing practices of many other ancient cultures. Physical punishment existed, but was not the primary method of discipline, and parents seemed to understand that curiosity and exploration were natural parts of childhood development, rather than character flaws to be corrected. At 2, Amenemheb is already learning to help with simple tasks carrying small items, sorting objects by size or color, and beginning to understand the rhythms of daily work. This wasn't exploitation, but rather the natural way children learned the skills they would need as adults, integrated into the family's economic and social life from an early age. Amenemheb spends several hours each day with his grandmother Tauret, who has appointed herself the primary educator in matters of proper behavior, basic skills, Boys typically learned their father's trade, while girls learned household management, weaving, and other skills from their mothers and female relatives. The love, frustration, joy, and exhaustion of parenting transcend historical periods and cultural differences. They discuss his personality traits, wonder about his potential talents, and plan for the education and opportunities they want to provide. It's the same conversation parents have had throughout history, mixing practical concerns with dreams and aspirations for their children's happiness and success. Parents in ancient Egypt worried about their children's health, celebrated their achievements, and tried to balance nurturing with the need to prepare them for independence, just as parents do today. The education was practical and comprehensive, designed to prepare children for successful adult lives within their social and economic context. Ancient Egyptian communities were dense and interconnected, and children grew up in large peer groups that provided built-in playmates, teachers, and companions. Amenemhab is beginning to speak in short sentences, mixing the colloquial Egyptian of daily conversation with the more formal phrases he hears during religious observances and family ceremonies. Ancient Egyptian children were essentially bilingual from birth, comfortable with both the everyday language of home and street and the more elaborate vocabulary of official and religious contexts. You often see him playing with a group of children ranging in age from toddlers to preteens, learning the social skills and cultural knowledge that come from interacting with others outside the immediate family, and the kind of cultural knowledge that gets passed down through generations of storytelling. These sessions often take place in the courtyard, where she teaches him simple tasks like sorting grain or identifying different types of birds, while regaling him with tales of gods, heroes, and family history. This morning he has discovered the fascinating properties of spilled water. He arrives home each evening to be greeted by a toddler who launches into an elaborate account of his day's adventures, delivered in the mixture of words and gestures that passes for communication at this age. The bond between father and son is clearly strong, built on daily interactions, shared meals, and the kind of rough and tumble play that has been making mothers nervous for millennia, and is conducting what appears to be a serious scientific experiment involving a clay cup, a puddle, and his own feet. His mother watches with the patient expression of someone who has learned to pick her battles carefully. They're exhausted, overwhelmed, and probably wondering what they've gotten themselves into, but there's also an unmistakable contentment in their expressions. They've successfully created and begun nurturing a new life, participating in the ancient cycle of birth, growth, and continuity that connects them to every generation before and after, and to create a loving environment for him to grow and develop. She has strong opinions about everything from feeding schedules to the proper way to swaddle a baby, opinions that she shares freely and with the confidence of someone who has kept 7 children alive to adulthood. Nefertiti sits nearby, working on her weaving with the kind of focused determination that comes from knowing she has exactly 23 minutes before the baby wakes up demanding food, attention, or simply the pleasure of making sure everyone in the household is fully alert. And you find yourself returning to a home that buzzes with a particular energy that comes from having a toddler who has recently discovered the joy of climbing on everything and the power of the word no. Amenemhab, now a sturdy 2-year-old with his mother's curious eyes and his father's determined expression, has turned the orderly household into a delightful chaos of toys, half-eaten meals, and the constant background noise of a small person who has opinions about everything. Babies were breastfed exclusively for the first several months, slept close to their mothers for warmth and safety, and were carried frequently to promote bonding and development. Friends and relatives brought gifts, tiny amulets for protection, miniature clothing, and practical items like feeding vessels and bathing supplies. The celebration was smaller than the wedding festivities, but no less heartfelt, marking the community's investment in raising another generation of productive citizens. The Egyptians understood intuitively many things that modern science has confirmed about infant development and attachment. The birth itself, which you witnessed with the mixture of awe and terror that such events inspire, took place right here in the main room with the assistance of a midwife, whose experience delivering babies was matched only by her ability to remain calm while everyone else panicked. The name itself was considered to have power, and choosing the right name was seen as one of the parents' most important responsibilities. Spent the day pacing in the courtyard and receiving regular updates from various women who took pity on his obvious anxiety. When the baby finally arrived, healthy, loud, and clearly destined to have his father, stubborn chin came wasset as relief was so visible that the midwife commented dryly that she'd seen grown men handle construction accidents with more composure than expectant fathers handle childbirth. Ancient Egyptian childbirth was a community affair, with female relatives and neighbors providing support, encouragement, and the kind of practical help that modern hospitals provide with teams of medical professionals. Wasset, following the ancient Egyptian custom that men should make themselves useful during labor by staying completely out of the way. The weeks since the birth have been a crash course in the realities of ancient Egyptian parenting. The extended family support system has proven invaluable during these early weeks. What is particularly fascinating about ancient Egyptian infant care is how much of it aligns with modern pediatric recommendations. The community celebration that marked Amenemhab's arrival included rituals designed to protect the new baby and officially welcome him into the neighborhood. Historians still debate the exact details of ancient Egyptian naming ceremonies, but the evidence suggests they involved both practical elements, officially recording the child's name, and parentage and spiritual aspects designed to ensure divine protection throughout the child's life. As you watch the daily routine unfold, you're struck by how naturally Nefertiti and Wasset have adapted to their new roles. The economic impact of the new baby is becoming clear as well. As evening settles over the house and the baby finally falls into the deep sleep that allows his parents to eat dinner in relative peace, you notice the quiet satisfaction in both their faces. 2 years have transformed the household in ways both obvious and subtle. The house itself bears the marks of child-proofing that span centuries, sharp corners padded with folded linen, valuable items moved to higher shelves, and a general reorganization that prioritizes safety over aesthetics. Nefertiti has returned to her full weaving schedule, though she now works with one eye on her loom. The parenting style you observe is remarkably gentle by historical standards. Wasset has embraced fatherhood with the enthusiasm of someone who genuinely enjoys the company of small people. The extended family continues to play a crucial role in child rearing. What is particularly interesting about ancient Egyptian child development is how early children were expected to begin contributing to household activities. The neighborhood children have become an important part of Amenemhab's social development. Language development in ancient Egypt reveals fascinating details about how children learned to communicate. Historians still debate the exact nature of formal education in ancient Egypt, but the evidence suggests that most children learned through apprenticeship and family teaching rather than formal schooling. As you watch the family's evening routine, the shared meal, the stories before bedtime, the gentle negotiations about when it's time to sleep, you're re-struck by how familiar it all feels despite the 4,000-year gap. The conversation between Nefertiti and Kamwaset after Amenemhab finally falls asleep reveals their hopes and concerns for their son's future. 5 years have passed since that first evening in the garden, and you find yourself witnessing a scene that would be familiar to anyone who has ever watched a family grow and change over time. The small house has been expanded with an additional room, partly to accommodate their growing son. This morning finds him helping his father repair a section of courtyard wall that has been damaged by the recent flood season, though his version of helping involves more enthusiasm than actual skill. He holds tools with the serious concentration of someone who believes he's contributing meaningfully to important work, while Kamwaset patiently explains basic construction principles and occasionally redirects his son's efforts to prevent actual damage to the project. Unlike many historical periods where women's economic activities were restricted or discouraged, Egyptian society encouraged female entrepreneurship as long as it didn't conflict with family responsibilities. The polite consideration of their early marriage has evolved into the comfortable intimacy of people who have weathered life's challenges together and emerged stronger. They've developed their own shorthand communication, shared jokes that no one else understands, and the kind of partnership that allows them to work together efficiently, whether they're managing household tasks or dealing with their energetic son. Nefertiti manages her growing business while maintaining her household duties, a balancing act that requires careful time management and the kind of organizational skills that would impress any modern working parent. He has particular friendships with several neighborhood children, including a girl named Anki Zanaman, who shares his love of adventure and his talent for finding creative ways to get into trouble. Their friendship represents the kind of cross-gender childhood relationships that were common in ancient Egypt, where children of different sexes played together freely until adolescence brought more formal social distinctions. And partly because Kamwaset's promotion to master builder has improved their financial situation enough to invest in home improvements. Amenemhab's daily life includes structured learning time with his parents and grandmother, but also hours of free play that allow him to develop creativity. Though now it has been transformed by the presence of a second child who has added her own particular energy to the household dynamics. Baby Nebet, whose name means gold and whose disposition suggests she will live up to the precious metal's reputation for being both beautiful and valuable, and that children's creative projects, however messy, often teach more valuable lessons than formal instruction. She keeps one eye on the baby, one on her son's hydraulic engineering experiment. He's built additional storage for the household goods that seem to multiply exponentially with each child, reorganized the living space to accommodate a growing family's needs, and taken on additional work projects to support the increased expenses that come with having 2 children to feed, clothe, and eventually educate. and somehow manages to continue working on a particularly complex piece of weaving that has been commissioned for a noble family as religious ceremony. Every piece of clothing gets passed down, repaired, and modified for maximum use. Children typically learned hieroglyphics for formal writing and hieratic script for everyday use, making them functionally bilingual in written communication. The education was practical, focusing on the skills they would need for their anticipated adult roles rather than abstract academic knowledge. Amenemhab now spends part of each day with a neighborhood scribe who teaches basic reading and writing to children whose families can afford the modest fees. They discuss Amenemhab's education, debate whether to arrange apprenticeships or continue his formal schooling, and plan for Nebut's future needs. Ancient Egyptian parents faced the same fundamental challenge as modern ones: how to prepare their children for a world that would inevitably be different from their own, while instilling values and skills that would serve them well regardless of changing circumstances. Ancient Egyptian religion was deeply seasonal and community-oriented, with regular celebrations that marked important agricultural and religious milestones. These festivals provided opportunities for children to learn cultural values, social expectations, and religious knowledge through participation rather than formal instruction. Amenemhab approaches these lessons with the same intense focus he brings to his engineering projects, carefully copying symbols onto pieces of broken pottery that serve as practice tablets, and schedules you're struck by how naturally they've adapted to their growing responsibilities. Baby Nebut requires constant attention and care, while Amenemhab needs guidance, education, and the kind of patient supervision that prevents his creative projects from destroying the house or injuring himself. As the oil lamps burn low and the household settles into nighttime quiet, you feel the deep satisfaction that comes from witnessing a family that has grown strong together, meeting life's challenges with resilience, humor, and unwavering mutual support. His progress is steady, if not spectacular, and you can see the pride in his parents' faces when he demonstrates his ability to write his own name and simple words. Ancient Egyptian literacy was not universal, but it was more widespread than in many other ancient cultures, and parents who could manage it invested in teaching their children these valuable skills. Food is planned and prepared with minimal waste, and every household item serves multiple purposes. It's not poverty. This family is solidly middle class by ancient Egyptian standards, but rather the kind of careful resource management that was necessary for most families to maintain their standard of living. Sleeps peacefully in her basket while chaos swirls around her in the form of her 6-year-old brother and his latest engineering project. He accompanies his parents to temple festivals, participates in household rituals, and learns about the gods and goddesses through stories and songs rather than formal theological instruction. The project has transformed the courtyard into something resembling a miniature version of the Nile Delta, complete with irrigation channels and floodplains. His concentration on this work is absolute, and you can see glimpses of his father's methodical approach to construction problems mixed with a creative flair that probably comes from watching his mother design complex weaving patterns. Ancient Egyptian religion was deeply integrated into daily life, and children absorbed religious knowledge through participation rather than separate educational programs. Social skills and the kind of problem-solving abilities that come from navigating the world with minimal adult supervision. Amenemhab has embraced his role as Big Brother with the kind of protective enthusiasm that makes him simultaneously helpful and overwhelming. He's appointed himself the baby's primary entertainer, a position that involves singing songs of his own composition, demonstrating various physical skills he's certain she'll find fascinating, and providing a running commentary on her daily activities that suggests he believes she's far more intellectually engaged than her actual developmental stage would indicate. The elderly couple who sold them their house has passed away, their former home now occupied by a young family with twin boys who seem determined to give Amenemhab some serious competition in the mischief-making department. The community dynamics remain strong, with neighbors continuing to share resources, childcare responsibilities, and the kind of informal support network that makes daily life manageable. Amenemhab helps set out the bread and arrange the eating mats. Nefertiti coordinates the meal preparation while finishing a section of weaving, and Kamwasit shares news from his work site while ensuring everyone has enough food and attention. The new room serves as both Amenemhab's sleeping space and a workshop where Nefertiti can weave without constant interruption from curious small hands. Ancient Egyptian families typically had multiple children, partly for economic reasons and partly because infant mortality rates made it wise to have several children to ensure some would survive to adulthood. Nefertiti and Kamwasit are considering the timing carefully, weighing their desire for a larger family against the financial and emotional demands of raising children in their social circumstances. Amenemhab, now 4 years old, has developed into a child of remarkable energy and endless questions. The relationship between father and son has evolved into a genuine partnership of learning and discovery. Ancient Egyptian fathers were expected to teach their sons practical skills, cultural knowledge, and moral values through direct involvement in daily activities. And she now takes on commissioned work for wealthy families who want elaborate textiles for special occasions. The additional income has made a significant difference in their standard of living, allowing them to purchase higher quality food, better clothing, and even a few luxury items like imported perfumes and jewelry. Watching Kamwasit guide Amenemhab through the process of mixing mud and straw for brickmaking, you see an educational system that modern parents might envy. Hands-on learning that combines practical skills with quality time together. Nefertiti has also expanded her role beyond the household. Her reputation as a skilled weaver has grown throughout the neighborhood. What is particularly interesting about Nefertiti's business success is how naturally it fits within ancient Egyptian social expectations. The couple's relationship has also deepened and matured over the years. Their conversations now include discussions about having another child, a topic that brings both excitement and practical concerns. The neighborhood has also evolved around them, with new families moving in and old friends experiencing their own life changes. One of the most touching developments you've observed is the way Amenemhab has become integrated into the community's social fabric. Historians still debate the exact nature of childhood in ancient Egypt, but the evidence suggests that children enjoyed a relatively long period of play and exploration before taking on serious adult responsibilities. Religious education has also become part of Amenemhab's routine, though in the informal way that characterized most ancient Egyptian spiritual instruction. As evening approaches and the family gathers for their daily meal, you re-struck by how this household has become a functioning unit, where each member contributes according to their abilities and stage of life. The seasons continue their ancient rhythm, and you find yourself once again in the familiar courtyard. Amenemhab has discovered the fascinating properties of water flow and has constructed an elaborate system of channels and dams using mud, stones, and what appears to be several of his mother's weaving tools. Nefertiti moves through the controlled chaos with the serene efficiency of someone who has learned that fighting certain battles is pointless. The addition of a second child has changed the family dynamics in subtle but important ways. Kemwasit has also adapted to the expanded family responsibilities with the practical approach that characterizes his personality. The economics of ancient Egyptian family life become more apparent when you watch how carefully resources are managed in a household with multiple children. What is particularly fascinating is how the children's education has become more formalized as they've grown older. The writing lessons take place in a shaded corner of the local temple complex, where a patient elderly man named Ptahhotep guides a small group of children through the mysteries of hieroglyphic writing. Historians still debate the exact literacy rates in ancient Egypt, but the evidence suggests that basic reading and writing skills were valued and relatively accessible to middle-class families. The religious and cultural education continues through family participation in community festivals and ceremonies. As you watch the family's evening routine, now expanded to include the additional complexity of managing two children with different needs, the conversation between Nefertiti and Kamwasip after both children are finally asleep reveals their ongoing concerns about providing the best possible future for their growing family. The love and dedication evident in their parenting approach transcends the specific cultural context, representing the universal human commitment to nurturing the next generation and providing children with the tools they need to build successful, meaningful lives.